Okay, this is going to be about the coronavirus in California, and is should provide some guidance for your midterm answer. So overall, California, as of today, has had a little over 53,000 confirmed cases. 2,192 people have died, which is about a 4% confirmed case to death ratio. We've also done fairly aggressive testing, and we were fairly early in the um, process compared to other states. When we compare our load to the U.S. has a 1.15 million confirmed cases with 69,468 deaths. And so the rest of the country as a whole has a 5.8% cases to death ratio, whereas California has a lower ratio, a significant lower ratio, and we've had it for a longer time. So I mean, this isn't a case where this has just been introduced and we haven't caught up with the rest of the country. So overall, I think we can say we're doing pretty well with a really difficult situation. Our first case here in California was in first confirmed case was January 31st up in Santa Clara County, up in the Bay Area. Our first fatality was February 29th. On March 17th, the Bay Area issued a formal lockdown order, and that was followed 2 days later by Governor Newsom shutting down the entire state. We are expecting some reopening, staggered reopening this Friday, May 8th, means that we'll have been in statewide lockdown for 50 days. Now, as I said, the Bay Area was the first area to be hit with the coronavirus, and the first area in the country to do shelter in place. One of the big things that impacted San Francisco's response was that they were talking about the coronavirus earlier than most jurisdictions because the San Francisco area has a fairly significant Chinese American population. And because of prior outbreaks in China that really are in Asia that haven't really affected us here in the United States to a great extent, the Asian American community in the Bay Area was really plugged in. They started wearing masks a lot earlier than pretty much anybody in the country, and so the leadership there had early warnings. I mean, well before we had our first reported cases, and they used that time to really prepare. Whereas the United States as a whole really lagged in our preparation. We said for the longest time, this isn't real. In the Bay Area, they not only said it was real, but they started planning for it long before there were ever any outbreaks, and that really mattered. The other thing that mattered in the Bay Area was just incredible coordination between the tops between the 6 counties up there. California is very porous. Our counties are not distinct in some ways, and coordination between counties was very, very important. I mean, most people who work in San Francisco don't live in San Francisco County, and so making sure that response was coordinated was really a big deal. I think it also helped that the city manager in Santa Clara County was a medical doctor, just without just by coincidence. And so one of the big people who one of the important people in developing policy actually had medical training, and I think that mattered. Southern California was less coordinated. Our responses, pretty much every county was on their own, and that resulted in very different kinds of policies across the county. Now, these policies tended to be, days, within days of each other. When LA would do something, Orange County would do it a couple of days later. San Diego was one of the earlier responsive counties in the state. But again, we have very porous counties with people living and working in different places. Orange County in particular has had government level resistance, higher government level resistance than any major population center in California. As you know, the beaches were opened here where they weren't opened anywhere else, and there's some real problematic aspects to that. And so I think one of the things that we can learn is that the coordination wasn't nearly as good in Southern California, and that there was much more citizen and local government pushback here than up in the Bay Area. The rural areas have had the most pushback. For one thing, they've had the fewest cases, and fewest cases per population as well, not just the overall numbers. And so, because they haven't been hit as hard, they've been more resistant to the stay-at-home orders. These places are also more conservative, and we do know that the more conservative an area is, the more likely they are to kind of resist dramatic coronavirus-related area efforts. Um, there also is less stay-at-home work. You know, we have a lot of people in these areas who cannot work from home. A lot of natural resource-based jobs, a lot of agricultural jobs, and so in a way, if you're in San Francisco, if you're in the tech industry in San Francisco or Silicon Valley, it's not all that difficult to transition to a uh, stay at home and continue working. Where in these rural areas, they really don't have the same kind of option to do this on a wide scale. So either you're working in a job where you can't social distance and you're actually working, or you've shut down the entire economy. There's no kind of middle ground, which is one of the advantages San Francisco area had, was that the transition wasn't nearly as harmful to them, because I mean, it was harmful. I don't want to say it wasn't, but the transition wasn't nearly as harmful because so much of the population could at least partially work at home. Um, so as a result, the rural areas have had quite a bit more pushback. Um, we already have counties that have lifted the stay-at-home orders, kind of in defiance of the governor. And those are Modoc opened last week, and then Sutter and Yuba opened this weekend. Um, and the only school in the state that was open through this time was the public elementary school in Tulare County. The governor strongly recommended that all schools shut down, but he did not order schools to shut down. And so there's one school up in Tulare County that stayed open. And so you see that in the rural areas where they were in some ways less directly impacted, they were economically shutting down would have been even harder on them than the rest of the state, and they're just more conservative in general. One of the things that the coronavirus teaches us is that, it matters what your local leadership is, what your local economy is, and so we have a push against um, it you can't say this is what California did, because different places in California did different things. I mean, um, one of the big things going forward is going to happen with housing. California already has a severe housing shortage, particularly in the metro areas, and as people are unable to pay rent and mortgages because of job loss, how are we going to respond to that? And that's going to be a big challenge. It is going to bring the legislature in, where the legislature hasn't had a huge role, but going forward, especially as it deals with housing, and then secondarily as it to doing kind of supports for the economy, the legislature is going to matter more than they have up until now. Um, one of the big questions is, will there be a second wave? And if so, how will California apply the lessons they learned in this first wave? We have seen that California can learn lessons and can respond to changing situations pretty well. Um, Overall, I think it's really important to note that California has done about as good a job as anybody in the country. I mean, we've had evacuees from other countries be quarantined in California at March Air Force Base. We've had entire cruise ships empty into our ports up in Oakland early on. So it's not that we haven't we haven't been affected. It's that I think we've responded better. And San Francisco, I mean, sorry, New York has been hit abnormally hard. There are some differences between New York and California's metro areas in terms of reliance on the subway in terms of density, but I think there's also been a difference in leadership, and we see that. Um, we do see that leadership matters, and I think that as we start talking about, oh, maybe we need government after all of this in this country, after we've had years and years and years of devolution of trying to get rid of government, I think that we're going to see that the type of people you have in place is as important as having a government in place. And then we do see too that population centers have been more vulnerable than rural areas, and so it'll be interesting going forward to see across the country how the rural urban mix impacts states' responses in general. And we see the difference between rural and urban areas within California. But as states like Alabama and Georgia make decisions, they have a different sort of population dynamic than we have, and we have to keep that in mind. And so we have a I think in all, people look back on this will say California met the challenge. We had good leadership at the state level. We had really good leadership in the Bay Area and decent leadership in Southern California. The rural areas were more reluctant to impose these standards. However, they were also not hit nearly as much as a percentage of population, and they have their own kind of economic challenges. So that is where we are in coronavirus today. I hope that helps for essay.